Madison Reed thought the old lantern made the woman look poor, but she had no idea that the rusted handle in Clara Whitman's hand was tied to a deed powerful enough to take back the entire beach beneath the resort's polished feet. By 6 o'clock, the lobby of Seabrook Crest Resort glowed like a magazine cover. Sunlight spilled through 20-foot windows, catching on crystal pendant lights, white marble floors, brass luggage carts, and the chilled rims of champagne glasses carried toward guests in linen jackets and designer sandals. Outside, beyond the terrace, the Atlantic rolled in slow silver lines, brushing against a private stretch of sand marked by tall signs that read resort guests only. Behind the front desk stood Madison, 29 years old, flawless blonde hair pinned behind one ear, white blazer pressed sharp enough to look expensive, smile trained to appear warm only when the guest looked worthy of it. She had learned the resort's unspoken language quickly. A platinum card meant patience. A tailored suit meant respect. Scuffed shoes meant trouble. So when Clara Whitman stepped through the revolving doors in a faded blue cotton dress, worn brown flats, and a light cardigan softened by years of washing, Madison's smile changed before a single word was spoken. Clara was 42, pale-skinned, quiet, with chestnut hair tied low at the back of her neck. She carried no luxury bag, no rolling suitcase, no sunglasses perched like a badge of money. In her right hand, she held a bay lantern, old and weathered, its glass cloudy from salt air, its metal frame freckled with rust, its handle wrapped in a strip of faded rope. The object seemed almost embarrassed to be there, surrounded by polished stone and floral arrangements worth more than a week of groceries. A couple near the concierge desk glanced at it, then looked away with the faint amusement people reserve for something they do not understand. Clara paused just inside the lobby, not because she felt small, but because the smell of the ocean had reached her. For a second, beneath the perfume, citrus candles, and expensive lobby air, she caught the older scent of wet rope, pine docks, diesel boats, and her father's jacket after midnight walks along Whitman Bay. Her fingers tightened around the lantern. She had not come to be admired. She had not come to argue. She had come because the resort had announced that morning it would permanently close the last public path to the beach, the same path her father once used to guide fishermen home when storms rolled in from the east. Madison watched Clara cross the marble floor and decided the story before hearing it. Her eyes moved from the lantern to the cardigan, then to the shoes. By the time Clara reached the desk, Madison had already placed her in the category of people who wandered into expensive places by mistake. "Good evening," Clara said softly. "I need to speak with someone about access to the Old Bay Walkway." Madison tilted her head, her smile thin and bright. "Ma'am, this is a private 5-star resort." Clara nodded. "I understand what it is now." That one word, now, landed strangely between them. Madison's gaze dropped again to the lantern, and a small laugh slipped out before she could dress it as professionalism. "And is that part of your concern?" she asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Because we really don't allow antique props in the lobby unless they're part of an approved event." A hush did not fall yet, but the room began to listen. Clara looked down at the lantern as if Madison had insulted a person, not an object. "It belonged to my father," she said. Madison's expression sharpened with the pleasure of control. "I'm sure it has sentimental value, but this is not a flea market by the bay." A man waiting for his room key smirked. A woman in pearls lifted her phone slightly, not recording yet, only preparing. Clara remained still, her eyes steady, her voice even. "I'm here about the beach." Madison leaned forward, perfume and polished confidence crossing the counter. "Then let me make this simple. The beach is for paying guests. The walkway is closed. And whatever local tradition you're carrying in your hand, it doesn't belong here." Clara's face did not harden. It softened, almost sadly, as if she had just watched someone step onto thin ice without knowing the water beneath it was deep. Outside, the waves moved in, quiet and patient. Inside, Madison Reed had just mocked the one thing she should have feared most. For a moment, Clara only listened to the ocean beyond the glass. The waves were less than 200 yards away, but the resort had learned how to make them sound distant, as if even the sea had been trained to serve quietly behind expensive walls. She looked past Madison, past the shelves of room keys and the gold-framed awards for coastal luxury, toward the long terrace where guests leaned over white railings and watched the sun slide toward the water. Years earlier, there had been no terrace there. There had been a weathered wooden sign that read Whitman Bay Walk, hand-painted by her father in navy blue letters. There had been a public footpath lined with seagrass, a bait shop with a screen door that squeaked, and a small dock where fishermen came home after dark guided by the glow of the lantern Clara now held in her hand. Her father, Thomas Whitman, had never owned a tailored jacket, but every captain on that coast knew his name. He was the man who stayed awake through storms, who lit the bay lantern when fog covered the inlet, who walked widows down to the shore when boats were late and told them the truth gently when the radio went silent. Clara had grown up believing a beach was not a decoration for wealthy people. It was a promise. It belonged to children with buckets, retired men with folding chairs, mothers walking after work, teenagers learning the shape of freedom, and anyone who needed to stand near something larger than their troubles. But after her father died, the town changed. Developers arrived with rolled maps and soft handshakes. The old bait shop became a cocktail bar. The dock was replaced by a private pier. The path remained open at first because the Whitman Family Trust had protected public access for decades, but every year the resort made the entrance narrower, the signs colder, the security guards less patient. Clara had watched from a distance while taking care of her mother in a small inland town 3 hours away. She had not had the strength then to fight polished men with permits and lawyers. But that morning, when she saw the resort announcement online declaring the bay walkway permanently closed for guest privacy, something inside her became very still. She took the lantern from her mother's hallway shelf, placed the old deed packet in her tote bag, and drove 186 miles back to the coast without telling a soul. Now Madison stood before her, mistaking silence for weakness. "Ma'am," Madison said, tapping one manicured finger against the desk, "I need you to understand that beachfront access is controlled by the property. You cannot just walk in carrying some rusty object and demand special treatment." Clara lifted her eyes. "I am not asking for special treatment." "Then what exactly are you asking for?" Madison asked, her voice bright enough to cut. Clara reached into her tote bag and touched the edge of the folder inside, but she did not pull it out yet. "I am asking why your resort locked a public easement that has existed since 1968. Madison blinked once, then smiled as if Clara had mispronounced an expensive wine. "A public easement," she repeated. The man at the desk gave a quiet laugh. Madison heard it and grew bolder. "I am sure you read something online, but these matters are far above local rumors." Clara's hand remained on the folder. "They are not rumors." Madison leaned back, letting her gaze travel deliberately over Clara's simple dress. People who actually own coastal rights do not show up with garage sale lanterns and stories about old footpaths. The words spread through the lobby like spilled ink. A young bellhop lowered his eyes. An older woman near the lounge stopped stirring her tea. Clara felt the old grief rise, not hot, but deep, like tidewater filling a forgotten channel. Still, she did not raise her voice. She only looked toward the beach, where the private signs stood in the sand like lies waiting to be corrected. Madison had expected Clara to shrink after that, to mumble an apology, tuck the strange old lantern against her side, and disappear through the same revolving doors she had entered. That was how these moments usually ended at Seabrook Crest. The resort knew how to make ordinary people feel out of place without ever admitting it had pushed them. A glance from the desk. A slow call to security. A sentence polished enough to sound like policy and cruel enough to feel personal. But Clara did not move. She stood with one hand resting inside her tote bag and the other wrapped around the lantern handle, her face calm in a way Madison found irritating. Calm people were difficult to embarrass. They made the room notice the person doing the embarrassing. Madison's smile tightened. "Let me save you some time," she said. "The bay walkway is no longer accessible to the general public. The resort has upgraded the shoreline for guest safety, privacy, and environmental preservation. Clara looked toward the glass doors that led to the terrace. Environmental preservation, she repeated softly. Is that what you call placing rope barriers across a path my father maintained for 30 years? Madison gave a small laugh. With respect, ma'am, your father's habits do not determine resort policy. The sentence struck deeper than Madison knew. Clara saw her father in the lantern glass for a moment, not as a ghost, but as memory. Thomas Whitman carrying a toolbox down the sand before sunrise. Thomas Whitman replacing broken dockboards after winter storms. Thomas Whitman telling 8-year-old Clara that public land was only safe when ordinary people loved it enough to remember where the lines were drawn. Clara inhaled slowly. His name is on the original Coastal Trust. Madison's eyes flicked toward the guests watching from the lounge. She could feel the performance turning, and she hated losing control of a room. So she reached for the thing she could control. May I see that? She asked, gesturing to the lantern. Clara hesitated. Carefully. Madison took it with 2 fingers around the handle, holding it away from her white blazer as if it might stain the fabric. A faint ripple of laughter passed through the nearby guests. The lantern looked even more fragile in Madison's hand, its rusted frame glowing dull orange under the lobby lights, its cloudy glass scratched by decades of salt and wind. This, Madison announced lightly, is what happens when people confuse nostalgia with documentation. A man near the check-in line chuckled. The woman with pearls lifted her phone a little higher. Clara's mouth pressed into a thin line, but her voice remained steady. Please put it down. Madison turned the lantern slowly, inspecting it as though it were a cheap souvenir. Honestly, I have seen more convincing decorations at roadside seafood shacks. The bellhop behind the luggage cart looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The older woman by the tea service set her cup down without drinking. The lobby was no longer busy, it was waiting. Madison, sensing attention, smiled wider. Does anyone know if our gift shop is missing a nautical prop? She asked. Because apparently we have a historic artifact at the front desk. A few guests laughed again, softer this time, less certain. Clara took one step closer. That lantern guided boats into this bay before this building existed. Madison lowered her voice, but not enough. And now this building exists. That is the part you seem to be struggling with. She placed the lantern on the counter with a careless little clink. Not hard enough to break it, but careless enough to reveal exactly what she thought it was worth. Clara's eyes dropped to the glass. A small flake of rust had fallen onto the marble counter like a speck of old blood-colored sand. Madison brushed it away with a tissue. We maintain a certain atmosphere here, she said. Our guests pay for serenity, not confrontations about family memories. Clara looked at her then, fully, with an expression so quiet that Madison almost missed the warning inside it. You think this is about memory because you have not seen the papers. Madison folded her arms. Then perhaps you should take your papers to the county office instead of disturbing paying guests. I did, Clara said. This morning. The answer landed too cleanly. Madison's smile flickered, just once, but pride rushed in to cover the crack. Then I am sure they explained the situation to you. Clara gently lifted the lantern back into her hands. They explained more than you know. Outside, the setting sun touched the private beach signs, turning their white lettering gold for one brief, beautiful second. Inside, Madison was still smiling, still certain, still unaware that every mocking word had just made Clara's next move impossible to ignore. The small flicker in Madison's smile lasted only a breath, but Victor Langley saw it from across the lobby. He had been standing near the entrance to the terrace, speaking with a couple from Chicago about dinner reservations, when the atmosphere shifted. Victor was the assistant guest relations manager, a man who wore his navy suit like armor and treated wealthy complaints as weather reports that had to be handled before they became storms. He noticed the gathered faces first, then Madison's stiff posture, then Clara standing at the counter with that old lantern held close to her chest. To Victor, the scene had only one obvious meaning. An outsider was disturbing the illusion of perfection. He excused himself with a practiced smile and crossed the marble floor, his polished shoes clicking in slow, measured beats. Madison, he said, voice smooth but tight, is everything all right here? Madison turned to him with visible relief. I was just explaining our access policy to this visitor. The word visitor carried just enough distance to make Clara sound temporary, unwanted, and slightly inconvenient. Victor looked at Clara, taking in the faded dress, the soft cardigan, the tote bag, the lantern. His expression settled into polite dismissal. Good evening, ma'am. I am Victor Langley, Assistant Guest Relations Manager. I understand there may be some confusion about the beach. Clara met his eyes. There is no confusion on my side. A few guests shifted. Someone near the lounge whispered. Victor's smile cooled. The shoreline adjacent to this property is reserved for registered guests. The resort maintains that space under long-standing agreements. Agreements can expire, Clara said. And some were never honored properly. Madison let out a short, disbelieving breath. She claims there is a public easement from 1968. Victor's brows lifted with the kind of patience adults use with children telling impossible stories. I see. Clara reached into her tote bag again, but Victor raised one hand, not touching her, simply stopping the motion with authority. Before we continue, I need to ask whether you are a registered guest. No, Clara said. The answer was quiet and honest. Madison's eyes brightened, as if the room had just handed her the key to a locked door. Victor nodded once. Then unfortunately, you cannot remain in private guest areas without an appointment. Clara looked past him toward the terrace doors. Beyond them, the old path dipped through the dunes, blocked by a white rope and a sign planted where her father once left a wooden bench for tired walkers. I have an appointment with a representative who is bringing documents, she said. He should be here shortly. Madison gave a soft laugh. Of course he should. Victor ignored the laugh, but not the meaning. Even if someone is coming, you will need to wait outside the lobby. Clara's fingers tightened around the lantern. I drove 3 hours to prevent your resort from locking people out of land they still have a legal right to use. Victor's smile vanished by a fraction. Ma'am, I am trying to be respectful, but you are making serious claims in front of our guests. Your signs make serious claims every day, Clara replied. The room went still. For the first time, the exchange no longer sounded like a misunderstanding. It sounded like a challenge. Madison stepped around the desk, her heels sharp against the marble. This has gone far enough, she said. You have been treated with more patience than most places would offer. You came in here with an old lantern, accused this resort of wrongdoing, and interrupted guests who paid hundreds of dollars a night for peace. Clara's cheeks flushed, but her voice did not break. Peace for some people should not require erasing others. Madison's face tightened. This is not a town hall. This is a luxury resort. Victor turned slightly toward a uniformed security attendant near the entrance, giving a small signal meant to end the scene quietly. The young bellhop saw it and looked down again, ashamed of his own silence. The older woman by the tea service stood a little straighter. At that same moment, a boy of about 10 stepped away from his mother near the concierge desk, staring at the lantern in Clara's hands. His name was Noah, though nobody in the lobby knew that yet. He pointed gently, not rudely, with the pure curiosity of a child who had not learned how to pretend. Mom, he said, his voice carrying through the hush, why does her lantern say Whitman Bay Light? Madison froze. Clara slowly turned the lantern over. Beneath the rust, under a veil of age and salt, the engraved letters caught the lobby light. Whitman Bay Light, 1968. The words were small, but they struck the room harder than shouting ever could. For several seconds, no one moved. The engraving seemed too small to matter, yet the silence around it made the entire lobby lean closer. Whitman Bay Light, 1968. Noah's mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder, suddenly aware that her child had spoken into something far larger than a resort complaint. Clara held the lantern with both hands now, turning it so the letters faced the room. The old metal, which Madison had mocked as junk only minutes before, caught the last band of sunset and glowed along the engraved name like a memory refusing to stay buried. Victor cleared his throat. That does not prove ownership, he said, but his voice had lost some of its polish. Clara looked at him. No. but it proves I know exactly where I am standing. Madison reached for composure and found only irritation. Plenty of old objects have names on them. That does not mean someone can walk into a resort and rewrite property law. Clara's eyes moved to the terrace doors. Beyond the glass, the white rope across the dune path fluttered in the evening wind. Property law is why I came. Madison gave a tight smile. Then perhaps you should have brought a lawyer instead of a lantern. The sentence landed with cruel satisfaction on her face. She expected another ripple of laughter, but this time almost nobody joined her. The room had changed. The guests were watching Clara differently now, no longer as a strange woman with an old object, but as someone who might be carrying the first piece of a truth the resort had worked hard to cover with marble and money. Clara reached into her tote bag and finally removed the folder. It was not impressive. It was tan, worn at the corners, secured with a blue elastic band. Madison glanced at it and raised one eyebrow. Is that supposed to intimidate us? No, Clara said. It is supposed to be read. Victor stepped forward, cautious now. May I see it? Clara held it close. My attorney is bringing the certified copies. These are my family records. Madison folded her arms. Convenient. Clara looked at her, and for the first time, there was a faint ache in her voice. What is convenient is building a luxury brand on a beach people stopped fighting for because they were tired, grieving, or too poor to hire the right people. The older woman near the tea service whispered, "Good heavens." Victor heard it. So did Madison. The lobby lights warmed as evening settled outside, but the mood had cooled. Madison turned toward the security attendant with a sharper nod this time. Please escort her out of the lobby until her supposed representative arrives. The young attendant took one uncertain step. He was broad-shouldered, polite-faced, and clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, he said to Clara, I am sorry, but we may need you to wait near the entrance. Clara nodded at him with more kindness than anyone else had shown her there. I know you are doing your job. Then she turned back to Madison. But before I step anywhere, I want everyone here to understand one thing. That path was never yours to close. Madison's face flushed. You do not get to speak to staff that way. Clara's gaze did not waver. And you do not get to speak to history as if it has no witnesses. The words settled over the marble floor. Noah looked again at the lantern. His mother looked at the rope outside. The bellhop looked at Victor. For the first time all evening, the people in the room were not looking at Clara's dress, her shoes, or the age of the object in her hands. They were looking toward the beach. Then, just as Victor opened his mouth to insist again, the revolving doors turned behind them. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped into the lobby, carrying a leather document case in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply scanned the room, found Clara, and walked toward her with the calm certainty of someone arriving not to ask permission, but to deliver consequence. Mrs. Whitman, he said, loud enough for every polished corner of the lobby to hear. The county recorder confirmed it. The deed is active. Madison's mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. Outside, the ocean moved closer in the dusk. Ethan Cole's words did not echo loudly, but they changed the weight of everything in the lobby. The county recorder confirmed it. The deed is active. Madison stared at him as if the sentence had arrived in a language she refused to understand. Victor straightened his jacket, suddenly aware of every guest listening behind him, every phone angled a little higher, every staff member frozen between duty and disbelief. Clara did not smile. She simply closed her eyes for half a second, the way someone does when a long burden finally becomes real outside their own heart. Ethan stepped beside her and placed the sealed envelope on the marble counter with careful respect. I apologize for the delay, he said. The county office needed to verify the original Coastal Trust Index and the 1968 easement survey. They have now done so. Madison found her voice first, though it came out thinner than before. I am sorry, who exactly are you? Ethan opened his leather case and removed a business card, setting it in front of Victor, not Madison. Ethan Cole, real estate attorney for Mrs. Clara Whitman and the Whitman Family Coastal Trust. The word trust traveled through the room like a door unlocking. Victor looked down at the card, then at Clara, then at the folder in her hands. His face did not collapse, but the confidence drained from it in quiet stages. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said. "Seabrook Crest has maintained exclusive guest access to that shoreline for years." Ethan nodded. "Yes, that is precisely the issue." He opened the envelope and withdrew several certified pages, each stamped and dated that afternoon. The paper looked ordinary, almost disappointingly plain, yet everyone sensed that it carried more power than the chandeliers, the marble, the brass carts, and every private sign planted in the sand. Ethan placed the first page flat on the counter. The original deed granted the Whitman family ownership of the coastal approach and established a permanent public easement from Harbor Road to Whitman Bay. That easement was never dissolved. Clara watched Madison's face. The young woman who had laughed at the lantern now looked as though the lobby floor had shifted beneath her shoes. Ethan placed a second page beside the first, an old survey map copied in black lines, showing the dune path, the dock, and the shoreline before the resort existed. Across the lower corner, handwritten in careful script, were the words Whitman Bay Light Access Point. Noah stepped closer until his mother gently pulled him back. "That is the lantern name," he whispered. No one laughed. Ethan continued, calm and precise. When Seabrook Crest acquired development rights, it accepted a limited operating agreement. The resort was permitted to landscape, maintain, and monitor the beach area, but it was not permitted to advertise the public easement as private property, block the walkway, or deny lawful public access. Victor swallowed. "Our legal department would have reviewed all of this." "They did," Ethan said. "Several times. And over the past 2 years, Mrs. Whitman sent 3 written notices requesting voluntary compliance." Clara lowered her gaze for a moment. She remembered writing those letters at her kitchen table while her mother slept in the next room, carefully choosing words that sounded reasonable enough to be heard by people who had no intention of listening. Madison turned sharply to Victor. "I was never told any of that." Ethan looked at her, not unkindly, but without softness. "That does not make your conduct less public." The sentence settled like winter air. Madison's cheeks flushed deep pink. Victor reached for the documents, then stopped himself. "Are you saying she owns the beach?" Ethan looked toward Clara, giving her the choice to answer. Clara lifted the lantern slightly, its engraved letters facing the room. "I own what my father protected," she said. "And as of this afternoon, the trust has also purchased the remaining coastal operating rights your resort allowed to lapse." Victor's eyes widened. The security attendant stepped back from Clara as if respect itself had drawn a new boundary. Madison opened her mouth, but this time there was no polished sentence waiting to rescue her. The room had gone silent, not because Clara had raised her voice, but because the quiet woman with the old lantern had brought the truth with a county seal. Ethan turned the old survey map so Victor could see the thin black line running from Harbor Road through the dunes to the water. It was not dramatic on paper. It was only a pathway, narrow as a pencil mark, but to Clara it held half a century of footsteps. Children with towels. Fishermen with coolers. Nurses after double shifts. Her father carrying the lantern when fog rolled low enough to swallow the pier. Victor studied the map as though staring harder might erase it. "This cannot be right," he said, but the authority had gone out of him. Ethan slid another document forward. "It is right. The resort did not buy the beach. It purchased development privileges beside it, subject to the Whitman easement and the public access clause. When the operating rights came up for renewal last quarter, Seabrook Crest failed to complete the required preservation filings. Mrs. Whitman's trust acquired those rights this afternoon." A soft murmur moved through the lobby. The woman in pearls lowered her phone, suddenly less interested in gossip than truth. The bellhop looked toward the terrace doors, where the white rope across the old path now seemed less like policy and more like an accusation. Madison stood behind Victor, pale and rigid, her hands folded tightly in front of her blazer. She had mocked the lantern because it looked poor. Now the same lantern sat beside stamped county papers, and every rusted inch of it seemed more honorable than the polished desk beneath it. Victor tried one more time to save the resort's dignity. Even if these documents are valid, there are procedures. We cannot simply reopen a controlled guest area in the middle of the evening. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, her voice carried not anger, but command. You closed it in the middle of people's lives. The room went still again. Ethan removed a final sheet from the envelope. The county has issued temporary compliance instructions effective immediately. The rope barrier must be removed, the private beach signage must be corrected, and public passage must be restored pending formal inspection. Victor read the page. His jaw tightened. The words were plain, official, and impossible to charm. Madison whispered, "Victor, should we call corporate?" Ethan answered before Victor could. Corporate received notice at 4:47 this afternoon. So did the resort's legal counsel. That was when Madison truly understood. Clara had not wandered in confused. She had not come with a sad story hoping someone powerful would pity her. She had given them chances before this evening. Letters, notices, records, time. And only after being ignored did she walk through their doors with the one object they were foolish enough to laugh at. Victor turned toward the security attendant, his voice low. "Remove the rope from the dune path." The attendant hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the terrace. Every eye followed him through the glass doors. Outside, the evening wind lifted the edges of the white rope as he untied it from the posts. The sign that read resort guests only remained for a moment, catching the last light like a lie trying to look official. Then the attendant pulled it free from the sand. Nobody clapped. It would have felt too small for what had just happened. Madison watched the sign come down, and the color drained from her face with it. Clara stepped closer to the window, the lantern cradled in her hands. Beyond the terrace, the path opened like a memory breathing after years underwater. "My father used to say a shoreline remembers every footprint," she said softly. "I used to think that was just something kind men said to make children love where they came from." She turned back to Madison. "Now I think he meant that nothing stolen quietly stays hidden forever." Madison lowered her eyes. For the first time since Clara had entered, she had no joke, no policy, no polished insult left. Only the sound of the ocean, moving steadily beyond the glass, as if it had been waiting all along. Victor stood near the front desk with the county notice in his hand, looking for a version of the evening that still allowed him to feel in control. But control had already left the lobby. It had gone through the terrace doors with the rope barrier, down the old dune path, and out toward the water where the first public footsteps were returning to sand that had waited too long. A few guests moved closer to the windows, watching as two local workers from the marina, who had stopped by after hearing the news from a valet, walked cautiously through the opened path as if they expected someone to stop them. No one did. One of them removed his baseball cap when he reached the edge of the beach. Clara saw the gesture and looked down at the lantern, her thumb resting over the engraved letters. Madison remained behind the desk, her eyes lowered, her earlier confidence broken into small, silent pieces. She wanted to disappear into policy, into training, into the excuse that she had only enforced what she had been told. But the memory of her own voice kept returning to her. Flea market. Garage sale lantern. People like you. Each phrase now sounded different inside her head, stripped of polish, exposed for what it was. Victor approached Clara carefully. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, and the name seemed to cost him something. "On behalf of Seabrook Crest, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding." Clara turned from the window. It was not a misunderstanding. Victor hesitated. Ethan watched him without expression. The room watched Clara. She did not raise her voice, yet somehow everyone heard every word. A misunderstanding is when someone does not know which door to use. This was a choice. Your resort chose to close a public path. Your staff chose to treat local people like trespassers. And tonight, Miss Reed chose to humiliate an object she never cared to understand because it looked old in a room that worships new things. Madison looked up then, her face pale, her eyes shining with embarrassment. "I am sorry," she said, but the words trembled as if she was not sure whether she was apologizing to Clara, to Victor, or to the job she feared losing. Clara studied her for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in her expression. Only disappointment, and something more difficult to bear, compassion without softness. "You're sorry because the papers arrived," Clara said gently. "Tomorrow, I hope you become sorry because of the way you made another human being feel." Madison swallowed and nodded, unable to answer. Victor tried again, quieter this time. "What would you like us to do?" Clara looked toward the terrace. "First, the public access signs will go back up tonight. Not next week. Tonight." Ethan opened his case and removed a printed compliance list, sliding it across the counter. "I have the language approved by the county," Clara continued. "Second, every employee who handles beach access will be retrained on the easement and on respectful treatment of local residents." Victor nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." "Third," Clara said, lifting the lantern slightly, "this will be mounted at the entrance to the walkway, with a plaque explaining what Whitman Bay Light was and why that path must remain open." Madison looked at the lantern then, truly looked at it, seeing not rust but service, not age but witness. The older woman near the tea service stepped forward and said softly, "My husband proposed to me on that beach in 1979. We stopped coming when they told us we were no longer welcome." Her voice broke only a little, but it was enough. Clara's eyes softened. "Then you should be the first to walk it again." The woman covered her mouth, and her son, a gray-haired man in a resort polo shirt, gently took her arm. Together they moved toward the terrace doors. Guests stepped aside without being asked. Madison watched them pass, and for the first time that evening, she understood that luxury had made her mistake comfort for character. Outside, the old path opened under a darkening blue sky. Inside, the lobby no longer felt like a place built to keep people out. It felt like a room learning, too late but not too late, how respect begins. By the time the first public access sign was carried through the lobby, the sun had slipped below the horizon and the resort lights reflected across the windows like candles on dark water. The sign was simple, white with navy letters, nothing like the polished gold plaques near the elevators, but Clara watched it pass with a feeling no luxury object could have given her. "Public beach access, Whitman Bay Walk." The words looked almost fragile in the hands of the maintenance worker, yet they carried the weight of every person who had ever been told they did not belong near the water they had loved all their lives. Outside, the older woman stepped onto the sand with her son beside her, moving slowly, one careful foot after another. When she reached the edge of the tide, she bent down and touched the wet sand as if greeting an old friend. Behind her, the two marina workers stood quietly. A family from town paused at the open path, uncertain at first, then walked through when no one stopped them. Noah pressed his hands against the window, watching with wide eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "it looks like the beach got bigger." His mother looked at Clara and answered softly, "Maybe it just belongs to more people now." Madison heard that, and something in her face changed. Not fear this time. Not embarrassment. Something closer to understanding, painful because it arrived late. She stepped out from behind the desk and approached Clara with both hands visible at her sides, no clipboard, no policy, no polished smile to hide behind. "Mrs. Whitman," she said, her voice low, "I do not expect you to forgive me tonight." "I would not, if I were you." Clara turned toward her. Madison looked at the lantern, then at the documents, then finally at Clara's face. "I saw your dress, your shoes, and that lantern, and I decided who you were before you spoke. That was wrong. Not because of the deed. It was wrong before I knew anything." For the first time, Clara let the silence answer for a moment. Then she said, "Remember that feeling. The one you have right now. It can make you kinder if you do not run from it." Madison nodded, eyes lowered. Victor stood nearby, listening like a man who had mistaken procedure for integrity and was only beginning to understand the difference. Ethan closed his document case, but he did not leave. He followed Clara to the terrace, where the evening wind lifted the hem of her blue dress and carried the clean scent of salt across the stone. The maintenance worker had mounted the lantern temporarily on a wooden post at the entrance to the path, not permanently yet, but high enough for everyone to see. Clara stepped forward and opened the small glass door. Her fingers moved with the tenderness of memory as she placed a fresh battery light inside, a modern glow inside an old frame, past and present meeting without apology. When the lantern came on, its warm amber light spread across the dune grass and touched the new public access sign. The old woman on the beach looked back and covered her mouth. One of the marina workers removed his cap again. Noah smiled. Even the resort guests fell quiet, their champagne forgotten, their conversations softened by something more lasting than comfort. Clara stood beneath the lantern, and for a moment she was no longer the quiet woman Madison had tried to dismiss. She was the daughter of Thomas Whitman, the keeper of a promise, the owner of papers powerful enough to correct a shoreline, yet humble enough to use that power for others. The ocean moved in steady silver lines beyond her, washing the sand clean but not erasing the footprints. Madison watched from the lobby doors, her white blazer bright under the lights, her face changed by the lesson she had not wanted but desperately needed. Clara did not look back to see whether everyone understood. She only looked at the open path, the people walking it, and the lantern glowing where it had always belonged. And that night, Whitman Bay remembered her name.